More Stories from Grandma's Attic by Arleta Richardson, illustrated by Dora. Chapter 2, Grandma's Sampler. "Something is wrong with this, Grandma," I said. "It doesn't have as many stitches as I started out with." Grandma took my knitting and looked at it carefully. "You dropped a stitch back here," she said, and using a crochet hook she worked the missing stitch back up into the needle. "It is easier to pick up a stitch as soon as it is dropped than it is to go back and get it later. Sometimes you have to take your work out all the way back to the mistake." Grandma handed the knitting back to me and picked up her own work. I remember that I never had much patience with doing things over when I was your age. In fact, one time I decided not to bother, and I was sorry about it afterward. "Were you knitting something?" I asked. "No," Grandma replied. "It was a sampler I was embroidering. It was in the spring, just before school was out. The teacher had announced early in the year that there would be a contest. Everyone in the room would enter some kind of handwork to be judged by the school board members the last day of school. The prize would be a book, and we didn't have many books of our own. I was determined that I would win the prize and announced my intentions at the supper table the very day we found out about the contest. "I'm going to have a new book the last day of school," I said to the family. "You are?" Pa said. "Are you saving all your money to get one?" Pa knew that I didn't have any money or any prospect of getting any, so I knew he was just fooling. "No, I'll get a new book for winning the contest for the best handiwork." "What makes you think you'll win?" Roy asked. "I'm going to enter the contest too, you know." "Yes, but I'm a more carefuler worker than you are," I replied. "You mean a more careful worker," Ma corrected me. Then she eyed me thoughtfully. "On the other hand, you aren't the most careful worker I've ever seen." "I will be this time," I said confidently. "I won't hurry, and I'll take lots of pains to do it just right. And besides, I already prayed about it. I asked God to let me win." This seemed to settle the matter for me. Since I knew the Lord answered prayer, I had no question about winning. Even when Pa reminded me that God wasn't going to do the work for me, I was still sure I would win. The next day, Sarah Jane and I decided that we would enter the sewing division and make a sampler. Between our two homes, we would surely find enough bright-colored thread to work with, and a square of white linen was not hard to come by. "What are you going to say on yours?" Sarah Jane asked. "I haven't decided yet," I replied. "What are you putting on yours?" "I think I'll put 'Home is where the heart is' and make a border of hearts and flowers. Doesn't that sound pretty?" "Yes, it does," I said. "I think I'd like something about friends on mine." "How about 'A friend loveth at all times'?" Sarah Jane suggested. "That was our Bible verse last week." "That's good, I'll use that. We'd better practice on something else first, though. The one for the contest has to be perfect." Sarah Jane agreed, and we began drawing the patterns for our letters and flowers. When we finally had them just right, we carefully transferred the work to the cloth. In the weeks that followed, we used every spare moment we had to embroider our samplers. I did the border first with little flowers and leaves, and I thought it looked quite pretty. Ma agreed. "You are doing better than I expected, Mabel," she said. "If you do as well on the words, you may have a chance at winning that book." "Of course I'll win, Ma. Sarah Jane's looks nice, but it's not as smooth as mine. She said so herself." "Just don't be disappointed if you aren't first," Ma warned. "It doesn't pay to be too sure of yourself." But I was sure of myself. I just knew that mine was going to be the best one. About 2 weeks before the end of the term, Sarah Jane and I sat on the porch working on our samplers. "I just have 2 more words to do, and then my name and the date," I announced, and I spread the sampler out on my lap to inspect it again. Sarah Jane looked at it carefully. Then an odd expression came over her face. "Something is wrong, Mabel," she said. "There can't be," I exclaimed. "What is it?" "I think you spelled friend wrong." Horrified, I looked at the word. Sure enough, I had written a friend, F-R-E-N-D, loveth at. "Oh no, what can I do to fix it up?" "You'll have to take it out, back to there," Sarah Jane said. "There isn't room to squeeze an eye in without it looking funny." "But I don't have time to take it all out," I cried. "Besides, it will leave holes where I sewed it, and that will look worse." Sarah Jane was sorry, and so was I. It was either take the stitching all out and probably not finish in time, or leave it in and hope the judges wouldn't notice. I decided I would have to leave it, but I knew I wouldn't win. Ma was sympathetic. "I think you should put an I in here, even though it looks crowded. That would be better than having the judges believe you thought it was spelled correctly. As many times as you've looked at that sampler, I can't understand how you missed it." "That's what Sarah Jane said, too," I replied sadly. "When I looked at it, I just thought how pretty it was. I wasn't expecting anything to be wrong. I did so want to win that book. I was sure the Lord would answer my prayers." "Maybe you should have prayed to do your best rather than to win, Mabel. The Lord is willing to help us, but we need to do all we can with the intelligence He gave us." I knew Ma was right, but I was pretty sad the day I took the sampler to school. The teacher agreed that if it hadn't been for that mistake, it might have been a winner. The last day of school was exciting anyway. When the contest winners were announced, Roy was the first place in the woodcarving division with a small squirrel he had whittled. "You can be the first one to read my book, Mabel," he offered generously. "Maybe next year you can enter again and win your own prize." That was a good lesson for me, Grandma said. I was often careless after that, but I was careful not to be quite so positive about what I would do again, and I never blamed the Lord for my mistakes either. End of chapter 2.